One of my goals as an educator is to raise the level of the understanding of Islam from the perspective of religious studies as an academic discipline, but this is not an easy task. How can one define the concept of religion? Like any other word, religion has a history. The term came into existence at a certain time for certain purposes, and it has changed its meaning significantly over the years. Although it may be tempting to regard certain major concepts, such as religion, as universal and applicable equally in the same way in all times and places, they are, in fact, historically conditioned and depend upon particular circumstances. We cannot understand religion in a general or timeless sense or through an abstract definition. It has to be understood with respect to context. We have to understand the actors, the time, the place, and the issues to avoid making serious mistakes. Surprisingly, the word religion is not mentioned in the Bible. It is derived from a pre-Christian Latin term, religio, which was adopted by European Christians in the Western Mediterranean region. It's surprisingly difficult to find an equivalent term in any of the other classical languages of Christianity, such as Greek. And it's even more difficult to find comparable concepts if one looks outside of Christian sources. A brief excursion into the history of this term and some of its principal transformations illustrates how dramatically a fundamental term can change. While this is somewhat of a simplification, I think it demonstrates, I'm going to argue that our concept of multiple religions today is tied to recent historical developments, including the history of European colonialism. One of the most important authors in ancient Rome was Cicero, and he offered an explanation of the origin of the term religion in his Latin treatise on the nature of the gods, which was written about 45 BCE. According to his explanation, the Latin term religio was derived from the word relegere, which means to read again or read over and over. Thus, religio means a painstaking sense of duty, concentrating fully on what one is supposed to do. We still retain a sense of this usage in our expression, he reads the daily paper religiously. It was most common for Latin writers to use the word in the plural, religiones, in the sense of ritual duties. There wasn't necessarily any theological or doctrinal content to the word, to this concept of religion, but it did have a notion of duty and obligatory practice. The rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire led to a distinctively Christian adaptation of this concept of religion. The influential theologian St. Augustine expanded on this in a short book entirely devoted to the subject, the first of its kind. It was called On True Religion, written about 390. This was in part a philosophical treatise in which Augustine argued that true religion meant to acknowledge the Creator with reverence, uniting a correct intellectual perspective with an appropriate attitude and action. The exact nature of this acknowledgement could vary from one age to another. In earlier times, Augustine felt that the non-Christian, pre-Christian philosopher Plato had been an example of true religion in his own age. In the 4th century of the Common Era, in Augustine's own time, he announced the divine arrangement or dispensation for humanity was now the Christian faith, which united, as he put it, the philosophy of Plato with the truth of Christ. Augustine went on to articulate a detailed series of intellectual and spiritual stages of development. It's really a very impressive presentation, but it's in a separate topic. This is available to the seekers of true religion. Now, there are several points that were innovations in the Christian concept of religion. First, true religion only exists in the singular. He called it on true religion. He doesn't have any concept of multiple religions. Second, religion was now a subject that had a strong theological and doctrinal content. Third, the source of authority for the articulation of proper attitudes and actions was located in the authority of the Catholic Church as the historic tradition connecting humanity with Christ. Religion is not merely an abstract teaching, but it depends upon revelation expressed in time and space in a historical and local context. Uniting this theological truth with the legal authority of the Church would have immense repercussions for the development of Christianity. A major shift in the concept of religion can be detected at the dawn of the modern era, some 14 centuries after Augustine. Major and drastic transformations had taken place in European Christianity since the time of Augustine, not the least of which was the split caused by the Protestant Reformation. My example of the new perspective is taken from the work of the famous Dutch jurist Hugo Grotius in a book called On the Truth of the Christian Religion. This was published in Latin in 1627. Although the title appears superficially similar to Augustine's, the difference is profound. Particularly in the wake of the European wars of religion between Protestant and Catholic, it had become clear that religion is a noun in the plural. There are multiple religions that all claim the same authority. Glossing over the split within Christianity, Grotius turns his gaze outward, and he now describes non-Christian groups as religions true also, although they are necessarily false religions in his view. Grotius's book was actually a debating manual for European sailors on journeys of economic and military conquest, to help them to convert the Jew, the Muslim, and the pagan to true Christianity. What's new about this perspective? As with Augustine, doctrinal truth and legal authority are claimed for Christianity. But now, Christianity is one of several religions that are in competition for world domination. The framework for this new emphasis was the era of European colonialism, which you can date back to the time of Columbus, but which begins to hit its full stride at the end of the 18th century. Now, in setting up this global conflict between Christianity and all other religions, Grotius skips over the crucial conflict within Christianity, which is the Protestant Reformation, obviously the biggest crisis in the history of modern Christianity since the breakup of the Orthodox Church 600 years earlier. It led to immense social upheavals, including peasant revolts, apocalyptic uprisings, and interminable wars between Protestant and Catholic. Remember reading about the 100 Years' War? This was all based on religious identity. Politics was so closely fused with religion that the slogan of the day was, "Religion belongs to the ruler." In Latin, cuius regio, eius religio. So in other words, if you had a Protestant king, everybody was going to be Protestant. These bloody and prolonged religious wars eventually provoked revulsion against the intolerance of different religious beliefs. A series of philosophers and thinkers began to advocate that morality and behavior alone should be controlled by the state, while belief could remain a private matter. The culmination of this doctrine of the Enlightenment came in the concept of freedom of religion and tolerance, as seen in the rejection of established state religion by the framers of the American Constitution. But many European countries, with the exception of revolutionary France and the communist regimes, have continued to accept forms of official state recognition of particular churches. Still, in general terms, the shift to modernity has decisively elevated the power of the state over religion in matters of law and political authority,